Welcome to the Catch 'em Keep 'em podcast featuring Melissa Glenny, CEO of Franklin Professionals, and Mark Altman, founder of Mindset Go. Melissa shows you how to catch 'em with tips and tools designed to support human resources, executives, and hiring managers to attract top-level talent. Mark provides proven strategies to keep 'em that empower leaders to engage and retain high-achieving teams. Let's dive in. Hello, welcome. We're glad to be here today, Mark. I'm so excited to talk with you about this topic. It's becoming a bigger topic than I ever anticipated it would.
It sure has, Melissa, and I think we're kind of all in uncharted territory. And now I gotta start out by asking you, how are you doing with your family and your girls and your husband? How's everything going?
Got a little cabin fever. I did a workout on the deck outside today. That was nice. Cold, but it was outside, so that was good.
It's funny, Melissa. Like I feel like the word distraction can be taken either way, right? Sometimes distractions can be good, and sometimes they can be bad. But I feel like there are some silver linings coming out of this, whether it's a project like you just said, you're able to work on your deck or things, but I'm finding some silver linings. What about you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm really just trying to embrace this. I think about it and it sounds so strange because this is obviously a really dire situation for so many people, but I look at it like, when are we ever going to have this opportunity again? My kids and we're here together all day. I had no idea my daughter is just like this natural baker. So she's been baking.
That's
I
great.
have more French baguettes in my house right now.
That's great.
And so, there's definitely, you're absolutely right, Mark. There's definitely silver lining. So, we just find them where we can.
Well, I'll tell you my two biggest takeaways, Melissa, from this experience so far. First of all, I always called myself a homebody, but I'm feeling like after this is over, I may not be any longer.
Uh-huh.
And the second thing, this is unbelievable. I have made fun of country music for the bulk part of my life, and I've now become a country music fan. It's crazy, Melissa. People are making fun of me because I've always made fun of it, and now all of a sudden I like it.
Okay, so I'm just so curious. I have to know, how does being stuck in your house
Yep.
convert you to a country
I'm
music
going to
fan?
tell you. I'm going to two things that happened. One is on a sad note, the death of Kenny Rogers, and I was a fan of Kenny Rogers, and so I've been listening to more of his music, which has spurred me to listen. Like he has a lot of songs that are story songs, so to
Yep.
speak. And I think country music as a whole has a lot of story songs like that. So it's got me listening to some other people, and it's crazy. I'm like, what have I been missing out on? This is actually pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Wow. So thank you, Kenny.
yeah, thank you, Kenny. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
So it's motivating.
Well,
So
I'm
speaking
glad
about
you're holding up.
yeah, it's motivating me, Melissa, to listen to more music.
There you go. Good. Well, so why don't we dive right in, Mark? I mean, speaking of motivation, I'm really excited to continue the conversation about working remotely, staying motivated, and helping people to not only keep themselves motivated, but to motivate their teams as well. So no better place to start than goal setting. Um, we'll talk about goal setting. We'll talk about procrastination, how to know when you're going sideways on your motivation, and then maybe tie it all together with how do you manage distractions. So help us. You work with tons of companies to help them and their employees set goals. What do you think is the the thing that people struggle with the most when it comes to setting their goals?
That's easy, Melissa. It's just getting started. And I think, I even saw it today in my own life. There's a bunch of like little administrative, not even having to do with my business, just a lot of administrative tasks that I've been putting off. Collectively, those tasks take me about an hour and a half. They're all little, but I've been putting them off for weeks. I mean, even pre-coronavirus, I've been putting them off. And I think if I had a nickel for every time over the course of my life, I struggle to get started on something. And then once I finally got started, I said to myself, all right, this wasn't so bad. Or wow, what a huge relief to get this off my chest. And I think for a lot of people, when it comes to setting goals or being motivated to move forward or progress, it's just that getting started. And what are your thoughts? How do you see that?
No, I agree. And I'm lucky to have ADD. So, and, and I say that because we could talk more about that because I when it comes to distractions, I was curious on your thoughts. But um, the one challenge is obviously trying to focus. But I mean, I do focus. I focus on like 100 things. So I also do have the ability to hyper focus, and I know that that's very common. So I think you're so right. If you can get started, then the momentum just carries you forward. So I agree that that's the hardest part. Um, and I think it depends on the goals too, the level of the goals. Because if I was to say there were more like life um, impacting goals as opposed to, weekly task list kind of goals, I probably would approach them a little bit differently. But, in the sense that I think values is something that's really important to understand before you attempt to set life goals. But that might, that's kind of a deeper dive, I think, into maybe a bigger topic.
Well, I have to tell you, Melissa, I used to this word goals. I used to have such a pet peeve around it because everywhere you look, especially when you're in business, you're told to set goals. You're told the importance of weekly goals, monthly goals, yearly goals, all those things. And what's interesting to me about it is the reason why I used to get so frustrated when I would hear someone say you got to set goals is because setting them is not even half the battle. That's setting goals is getting started, right? That's actually taking the step to get started. But knowing how to achieve the goals, like what does that roadmap look like? What are the barriers or obstacles you can anticipate? And one of the um, concepts I think people miss a lot when it comes to goal setting, and especially around motivation, is the difference between self-discipline and self-motivation.
Mhm.
And self-discipline is doing things you're supposed to do anyway. Things that you would just know to do over the course of the year. Self-motivation is doing things such as setting a goal. I want to lose weight. I want to be a better leader. I want to recruit more quality talent, like things like that. You can set the goal, but if you don't have a plan, it's going to impact your motivation to be able to execute that goal.
Yeah, I agree. You know what else, as you're talking, I think you reminded me of is I think that a lot of times I've noticed people, and myself included, uh, get a little confused about how defining a goal as opposed to a task or a project. And those concepts, I think, get kind of like all muddled together, and then that's where I think it also creates kind of a stop for people because they're just kind of in the fog.
Well, I think you're right, Melissa. And you and I are both in a masterminds group that really strongly believes in the entrepreneurial operating system based on the book Traction.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you and I not only practice, but we are believers in is having your goals visible, having them right out in front of you every day. And I think, you know, when you wake up in the morning, right? And I have to ask, Melissa, because it all starts when you wake up. And now more than ever during the coronavirus, what do you find yourself doing to disrupt if you do get up and you have that malaise and depression or frustration over a cabin fever? What do you do to snap out of it and start to try to achieve your goals for the day?
Yeah. Well, I have one of my morning rituals is to go to it's my brain dump list. So I keep a list of just anytime, it's like a shopping list. Anytime I think of something, it could be a crazy idea, like I might want to try someday, or it could be something, oh yeah, that's a deadline. I've got that next week. I got to do that. It just goes on a list. I just dump it. And then on a weekly basis, I parse through and see, what needs to happen on what day. But I actually like to do it at night as opposed to in the morning, because so I'm planning my next day in advance. I honestly, sometimes I do it. Sometimes I'm like, I'm tired. I'll do it in the morning. So, it's hit or miss. But I know there's a lot of research around brain science that shows the effectiveness of planning the night before, and kind of shows how it creates the pathways in the brain to turn it from a goal into an actual intention. And then when your subconscious mind believes that that's going to happen, it's miraculous how it does actually happen.
So Melissa, do you have literally like a pad of paper next to your bed where you're just keeping like an ongoing list of like ideas and brainstorm items?
I don't like paper, so
Oh,
I
that's good.
do. I use Asana. I like Asana because it's so quick and easy, and then I can move stuff around into different projects and assign dates, change the dates. So, I used to do a lot of scratching out, and then I couldn't stand that there were scratches on the paper, so I'd have to write the whole list again. So,
So, so Melissa, how often are you when it comes to looking at that when it comes to looking at Asana and it comes to saying how often are you looking at your goals? How often are you revising your goals?
hmm. So I have a short answer. I have a process every year where I will sit down and put all my goals down. And then I brainstorm, like I said, if I have an idea, I'm like, oh, I'm going to add that to the list. So it's always evolving. I've done it twice so far this year. So what are we in? So, in 3 months, I've sat down and really reviewed my goals. But I have a practice of reading my goals every single morning before I start out the day. And when I say my goals, I mean my 10 goals for the year. So I start my day looking at the long range prizes,
Keep
just
going. Yeah.
to keep it going in my
Yep.
head.
Yeah.
Uh, so and again, like do I have a weekly goal? Yeah, maybe 1 to 3 tops. But a lot of things I look at as in the short range. I look at it like, well, that's a project or that's a task, but goals are more overarching kind of bigger processes.
And Melissa, I love what you're talking about because you're talking about things in my mind that are associated with positive psychology, self-talk, things like that. And what's funny is it's something that corporate America is really slow to embrace. And
Mm,
one of the points I make when I work with organizations is we have no problem with negative self-talk, right? All of
right.
us at one point or another will tell ourselves how bad we are or how poorly we handled a situation. But to sit there every morning and look at your goals and say them out loud and say, hey, here are the things I set out to do this day, this week, this month. It seems corny, like, doesn't it? Like when you think about it, like you're just going to sit there by yourself and read something out loud.
Mhm.
But that's just it. It has been proven that doing what you said is a very effective way to stay connected in touch with what your priorities are.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true. You kind of don't let yourself off the hook.
And what's interesting is willpower. We all struggle with different aspects of our lives with willpower. Some people it's food, some people it's alcohol, some people it could be video games. I mean, it could be a number of things. But if you repeatedly resist temptation, or vice versa, if you repeatedly are able to motivate yourself to get to where you want to be, your willpower strengthens without even
Mhm.
realizing it. It's almost like an innate reaction. So I
Yeah.
think that's critical also.
Yeah. Oh, you're so right. I mean, this morning I did not want to work out. And I find that if you can just say, give yourself a little slack and say, all right, I'm not committing to a 30-minute run. So I'm going outside. I'll do 10 minutes. But at the end of 10 minutes, guess what happens? I'll keep going. I mean, I'm already in it. I mean, I might as well just continue on. So I think that what you're saying is so true. I mean, I see that time and time again in my own personal experience.
Well, and Melissa, you're making a good point. You're talking about distraction, and that's one of the things I know we wanted to cover today because in working remotely, we're all susceptible to different kinds of distractions, either different than we've had in the past or more frequently than we've had in the past.
Yeah.
And I know you and I are both parents, and so what I think is interesting about distraction is I think one of the things a lot of parents are dealing with right now is guilt, because it's almost like you're weighing on one hand, you have this opportunity, you're home with your kids, you're spending more time with them than maybe you ever have at any point since they were, prior to going to school.
Yeah.
And at the other hand, you've got work to do. And so how are you able to find that balance between spending that quality time, but still keeping your eye on the ball and hitting your goals?
Yeah. I think the first thing I would say is structure. I like the Pareto method. Have you heard of the Pareto
I
method?
have.
Yeah, I really like that. How did you come? Is that something you use? How did you come to know about that?
I did some research on it. I can't say I use it intentionally. I think I use it more accidentally than intentionally. But when I use it, I see the impact in it. I see how helpful it is.
Oh, good, good, good. Yeah, okay. I
Why
do
don't you
too.
explain to our listeners, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners don't know what that is.
So the premise behind it is that there are a couple of things. I think that initially the research showed that you can avoid brain fatigue if you follow a pattern of essentially sprinting or working for say 25 minutes and then take a 5 or a 10-minute break. The tool I use is called the tomato timer. It's tomato-timer.com. So that's the way that one is set up. But what I also find is that structure, I can do anything for 25 minutes. Anything can wait 25 minutes. So aside from the house burning down, I can say to the kids, I'll be with you, but I got 7 minutes to go. And then I know that I'm going to have those designated times that I can attend to something else. And then again, it's structured. So I've got X amount of time. I feel like we tend to use the amount of time that we have. So if we don't put structure around the time we're going to do something for, it just kind of like bleeds on, and we don't really realize where our time's going.
So, Melissa,
So
what would you say to someone? What you're saying, as I said, I'm a believer in the Pareto principle, but what would you say to someone who says, but what about the transition time of working on something and then disconnecting from it and then having to reconnect to it? What about the loss of productivity for someone that argues against the Pareto principle? What would you tell them?
I think that there is a case where you would not want to use it, and I personally find in creative work, if you're writing something creative and you're in a flow, like don't stop. So I definitely would say there's times when it's applicable, and then times when you wouldn't want to use that. But as far as lost productivity, I think that's the science shows that people are more productive when they take small breaks than when I don't think you realize when you're just working continuously, sitting for 3, 4, 5 hours or longer, that your efficiency and your effectiveness, it's like any other muscle. It's going to fatigue and you're going to start losing effectiveness.
Well, Melissa, I think you hit the nail right on the head, because I was just thinking as you were talking about, so much of, we all have this tendency to want the right answer, to be better, to be happier, to be more productive, to be whatever. But everything has situational awareness. And what I love about what you just said is, for the people who struggle, who say, well, boy, if I work on and off this transition time, but are they actually comparing that against anything? Because if you were to sit there and say, well, let me see how productive I am when I'm working 5 straight hours, if they're not measuring how their productivity drops with 5 straight hours of work, then you really don't know the difference. Does that make sense? Because if you break in and out, right? So that's what's tricky. And I think that I love what you said, being creative is maybe a time not to use it, but there's so many other times where you could use it.
Oh yeah. And have you ever done time studies with yourself or with your employees that I'll keep an Excel spreadsheet, and like every time I transition something, I'm like, oh, took a call for 3 minutes. And, it sounds crazy and like you're really splitting hairs, but it's so insightful. I don't know if you've done that before.
No, well, so you've done it. So what were your takeaways when you did it? Because I have not.
Well, first I'll make a confession. When I started it, maybe 5 years ago, I had an employee who I thought we were going to go through this exercise together, and I was going to show her how she could be so much more efficient, because I thought more should be happening within
Okay.
this particular time frame. And yeah, I realized like, no, she's, I couldn't do any better than she's doing. But it was eye-opening for me. And then I mean, all kinds of insights have come out of it. But switching from one task, we think we multitask, but it's not an efficient way to work. So interruptions and multitasking, those are the two things that I've found have been just really, they're number one, their time sucks, and number two, they suck your motivation because you have to, recharge and get
Hmm.
going again. And then, so yeah, I do them about twice a year. I'll just kind of check myself and just do a time study for a couple of days and see what my habits look like
Oh, that's great.
and make adjustments.
Yeah, and I think, what's interesting is, before this call today, we were joking because I was trying to figure out how to shut off the sound of my email so it wouldn't interrupt our podcast today. And then I joked to you and I said, boy, I'm going to keep it off for good. And I can't tell you how many times I'll be in the middle and I'll hear that ping of an email and I'll stop what I'm doing and check the email. And I think what we all struggle as humans to do is we struggle to recognize what we're in control of and what we're not in control of.
Yeah.
I think that for those of you listening today that know you're being hampered or frustrated by distractions, to me, the first step is to recognize what you are actually in control of to set yourself up for success. Now, there may be some things you're not in control of, but I would bet if you were mindful and took a step back and tried to digest, wait, there are things I could do, such as shutting off the sound in an email. I think there's ways people can improve just organically by just thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I mean, and it's so easy to get sucked in because we've got things pinging and dinging all the time. It's just a way of life. And it feels a little weird. I don't know, in the current situation, kind of all locked up in our homes, when the TVs go off and there's just the hustle and bustle of life is not really there anymore. So it feels a little strange, but I think that, I just so admire people who can be Zen and just kind of keep on even keeled, and, not get reactive on the fires and things like that. Cause I really think that, they really have a special ability to be very efficient and very effective in the way they work.
Well, so Melissa, I want to bring up something that I was thinking. It really blends actually the concept of distractions and goal setting, and that's deadlines. And one of the things that I think is different, a lot of people work in jobs that are now affected obviously by COVID-19. And I think what happens is people rely from a prioritization standpoint, from a time management standpoint, from a productivity standpoint, they rely on those deadlines
Yeah.
because that's what drives them to get work done and get behavior done, or have the behavior to get it done. So I actually think the transition from having tight deadlines, whether they're internal or customer driven or not, I think that's wreaking some havoc with people because they're not used to being productive without relying on deadlines.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too that I notice in myself and, having led teams that we tend to work in a very reactive way. So when you don't have anyone to be reacting to, or, very little to be reacting to, it's just basically the email streams right now, or maybe instant messengers if you have
Yes.
that company. But yeah, it does leave you in a position where, it's just, I hope that people can take a step back and understand how they can really take control of their time and structure it so that they're able to prioritize and not be behind the eight ball. I think most people feel like they're constantly behind the eight ball.
Well, right. And I think there's an additional wrinkle because without the deadlines, it's a lot harder to be motivated because, hey, there's things like I know in my own business, I'm not used to operating with such freedom around deadlines. So there are projects that I have that, frankly, if they don't get done tomorrow or the next day in some cases, it's no big deal.
Mhm.
So that can also affect like if you're a leader, whether you're working from home or whether your team is working from home or you're working in the office, you need to set expectations and you need to have some structure. And so I think one of the challenges, I guess, Melissa, you work with so many companies and help retention and recruiting. What advice do you give around this? Because I think now more than ever, being motivated without tight deadlines and urgent needs is going to become even a bigger problem when people realize. I mean, before you answer, one other thought too. If I had a nickel for every time I talk with someone these days and I said, what's your biggest problem? I would say 75% of the time people say it's time management. So I just wanted to throw that in addition to this deadline issue.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think that, my advice to your question there is being really clear on what it is long range that you're like, starting with your long range goals and then backing that down into the chunks that you can focus on on a timeline. I mean, it sounds like so ridiculously simple, but when you have that structure from the get-go, that's kind of like your foundation, and then just controlling your time, like scheduling yourself and knowing how to recognize when you're going off track. And like, that's one of those questions that I have for you, Mark, because I know that, you work with people so much on self-reflection and understanding their triggers and cues. So what would your advice be to someone who's like, yeah, I know what I'm supposed to do. I hear what Melissa's saying. I know I'm supposed to be doing that, but it's not happening. What would your advice be to somebody to help them troubleshoot that?
Well, first of all, I think one of the reasons I built my business around emotional intelligence and mindfulness is because I do think they are the key contributors to the kinds of things we're talking about in this podcast today. And the word, you were alluding to the word incremental. And what I think is a problem for people with the word incremental is everybody has different standards and expectations for themselves. But I think a lot of times, Melissa, when people are improving a habit, a quality, a characteristic, a skill of some kind, I think people tend to be very hard on themselves, and incremental improvements are kind of washed up like, that doesn't mean anything. I didn't really accomplish anything. But I think your point is critical, because incremental growth, incremental components to a project, incremental goals to get where you want to go, that word is so critical in every aspect of your life. And frankly, Melissa, what I see a lot in leadership is a lot of leaders who have and entrepreneurs too, who have very, very high standards and expectations for themselves. It really adversely impacts their leadership, because they expect the people that they lead and manage to have that same level of expectation. And that's just not realistic, because we're all motivated differently. So my answer to your question is self-awareness and mindfulness. If you can, I say catching yourself in the act. If you can catch yourself in the middle of the day, recognizing A, that you're feeling unmotivated. The next step would be B, to ascertain why you think you're feeling unmotivated. C, to tell someone, because everybody needs a support system and a coach and a guide. And that can be your husband, your wife, your brother, your sister, your kids, whoever. C would be to tell someone. And then D, have them disrupt your thought process so you can rechannel what you want to do. And by the way, Melissa, to your point earlier in the show, that could be as simple as pulling out your goals sheet that you have in Asana, just to kind of remind you of what you're trying to do. And I think that's why self-awareness and mindfulness are huge, because that's what disrupts your thought process.
Yeah. And I love your point about going to someone and talking it through with somebody else. I mean, sometimes we get so in our own head that we just make it even more difficult for ourselves. So then we start beating ourselves up, and it's like, can't get out from under this. So I think that's a really good point.
Well, Melissa, you and I do this for each other. We're accountability partners for each other. But this term accountability partner, I mean, there have been so many studies done about adoption of goals, habits, ideas, values. It all comes down to that, because this accountability partner, I mean, Melissa, I think, you know what I think we should start doing at the end of each show? I think we should tell each other a goal we have at the end of each goal, at the end of each show. It can be big or small. We should make it smart, should be a SMART goal, but then we can, every week every show we do, we can check in with each other and see if we've done it. And that's what an accountability partner is.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I love that idea. Let's do
Right?
it.
I think
Yeah,
we need to do that. And,
yeah,
and listen, we want to challenge our listeners to do the same. And I think again, it's so important that you understand that no goal is a bad goal as long as it's a smart goal, and small goals lead to big goals.
mhm,
So there's no bad goal as long as it's leading you to something that's a bigger goal, I guess is the way I would say it.
yeah, yeah. So one last point I was hoping we could talk about, because we haven't actually talked about this, you and I, and I'm really interested in your perspective about procrastination. Speaking of things that I've been meaning to do since I've got all this time on my hands and still haven't done it. um, what what do you think is behind procrastination? Why do people procrastinate?
Well, I think, I always make a funny joke about procrastination. Anytime someone comes to me, Melissa, and they said, Mark, you got to help me. I procrastinate. And I said, well, why do I need to help you? And they're like, well, because I procrastinate. I go, so? I go, is it hurting you? And they're like, no. I go, do you get everything done you're supposed to get done? They're like, yes. I go, then keep procrastinating. Now, obviously, I'm being facetious when I say that. But the answer to your question is this, Melissa, is that it all starts with your why. If you have any habit, procrastination being a prime example, if you have not found a reason, a reward for changing the habit, you're not going to change the habit.
Mhm.
And my favorite thing to teach around emotional intelligence is habit change, motivation and habit change, because there's so many dynamics that go into habit change. But procrastination is ultimately, you've identified things that you don't want to do. And whether it's because you're not passionate about them, whether it's because you don't think they're that important, whether it's because you've rationalized them to think that it's not that big a deal if I put off, whatever the reason is, you've decided these things are just not as important. And the sad thing is, Melissa, and you know this as well as I do, is in many cases, it's not the truth. It's
Mhm.
very important, but you've convinced yourself it isn't, or it's just going to be too painful to deal with. So I ask you, I don't see you as a procrastinator at all. And maybe you are, but I have not seen that side of you. So I'm just wondering, what do you do? I mean, you're such a successful businesswoman. You've had such a great career thus far. And so what have you done to avoid that procrastination?
No, thank you. Well, I appreciate that that's what you've observed. The truth of the matter. You're just making me think of years and years ago. I went to I was seeing an acupuncturist, and I was notoriously late for everything. So of course I was late for my appointment with him. And when I got there, I was apologizing, as I always did. And he made a comment about anger. He was Chinese medicine, and he said, being late is an anger issue. And I was like, me of all people, I never thought of myself as having an anger issue.
Wow.
And as I've reflected on that, I'm tying that into procrastination, because running late, feeling that guilt, procrastinating, oh, I still didn't get that done. They're all very effective ways of beating yourself up and punishing yourself.
Yeah.
So that's something that I became mindful of. It's like, why am I setting this off? Like, it literally would take me 10 minutes to get that off my desk. Why do I insist that it still sits there? So I think that just kind of checking in and saying, am I just being mean to myself right now? Like, take a step back and just do this.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to, I used the word disrupt a little earlier. And one of the things I do when I'm procrastinating is, there's a guy who specializes in habits. He writes an amazing blog. He's written several books. James Clear. Are you familiar with James Clear?
No, I'm not.
Well, so you have to subscribe to his blog. It's absolutely tremendous. It's a very simple blog to read too. But here's the thing. When I find myself starting to procrastinate, I pull out one of his blogs around motivation and habits, and it reminds me of different things I can do. And I can give you a very quick, perfect example. I have not sent my QuickBooks file for 2019 to my accountant yet for taxes. And it's the only thing I haven't sent him. I sent him everything else he needs. And the reason why I haven't sent it is because I switched bank accounts in the middle of the year, and there's about 5 or 6 transactions I have to reconcile from the old bank account. This would probably take me about a grand total of 15 minutes, maybe 30.
Mm-hmm.
I could have done this at any point for the last 2 months, but here it is, still sitting on my to-do list. And I can tell you, I know the reason. The reason is because it's going to require me to do some research. And what I told myself, Melissa, right this moment, and this sums it all up, is research feels like a big word. It feels like something that's going to take me a long time. So I've convinced myself that this task is going to take way longer than it will actually take, when I know that's not the truth, but yet it still held me back from doing it. And that's why this disruption process, incremental process, those things are so critical.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I need to have a imaginary boss that can.
Well, but Melissa, that's a great point, because as an entrepreneur, when you own your own company, and that's why I know we do our masterminds group, you don't have as much accountability only to yourself, and that can be a struggle.
Yeah, yeah. But together we get through, right?
We do.
Why
So,
we do
Melissa,
it.
so what about for you though? You know, when you look at, we've talked about distraction, we've talked about goal setting, talked about self-awareness and mindfulness around avoiding procrastination. For you though, what has been your most difficult distraction, and what steps have you put in place? First of all, what's been your difficult distraction? When did you become aware of it, and what are you doing about
Mark, I think my most challenging distraction started about um, 10 years ago. And it's the most difficult for me because it's the one thing that is almost totally out of my control, and that is chronic back pain. So I can work through a lot of things, but when it's something that is just, like chronically nagging on you, that's been really tough for me. And I'm not like somebody that's willing to take pain medicine on a daily basis. And the other aspect of it is that it can creep up at any time without any warning. So it's not something that you can necessarily prepare for and say, okay, I know this is going to be a really rough week. I got to really make sure I'm, doing my morning routines and keeping my head in the right space. And so anyway, long story short, I have found that keeping some things at the ready that help me to kind of push through. But at the same time, having that willingness to tap out and just to say, okay, I recognize that I need to just take 15 minutes, take a half an hour, or whatever. Maybe it's 2 hours. I need to just go for a massage and like get this over with so that I can get back. So having just that self-awareness of like, am I pushing through because I just think that this is the right thing for me to do? It's almost out of guilt. Or am I pushing through because I really have a compelling reason? I've got to make this happen before I can, go off to get any relief. So I think it's just that that's been the biggest challenge for me. And I find that the Pareto method works really well because I can do anything for 25 minutes and know that I can go, stretch out for 10 minutes or even, take a 20-minute break at that point. So that helps a lot, just kind of chunking my day like that. And then I find mindfulness, meditation, even listening to binaural beats, certain sound waves that are helpful for pain management. So just the little things that can kind of help me kind of push through when those things come up. Thankfully, knock on wood, not too terribly often.
Melissa, I have a random kind of follow-up question. I don't mean to open up a can of worms, but I'm wondering, as a female entrepreneur, we know it's much harder in our world to be a female entrepreneur than a male entrepreneur. I'm wondering, now that you're home with your children so much, you're obviously a great role model. Have you noticed, become self-aware of any more pressure to model behavior for your kids about balancing work, life stuff? Like, have you thought about that? Have you noticed that at all? I'm just curious.
That's so interesting. You know, it's funny because I have two daughters who are total opposites. Well, in a sense, one is extremely academic, and so I have to tell her to stop doing her homework and go to bed already. She's just all about A's, and so. And then I have another who is ready to take over the world, and she's very entrepreneurial and enterprising. And school is like, you know, it's like, I don't have time for that. I need to go out and make money. In fact, she just built a website this morning to launch her bakery. so, so you know, to your question, I think that they're so different, and so being a mom to two kids that are so different like that, it creates more self-awareness for me, and I think it helps me to tune into them because we've got, you know, because I have two basically on polar opposite ends. So I can't say that I've given it a lot of thought in the sense that you asked me, but you know, now that you ask, I think that's a really intriguing question, and I'm going to be paying more attention now.
We'll have to revisit that at a later show. All right.
Yeah.
So before we sign off, what are our goals going to be? Our one smart goal going to be for our next show?
I have that, but can I ask you one last question before we
Yes.
go there?
Yes.
I'm interested in your distraction. So what's the number one distraction that you've had to deal with, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, Melissa, I mean, my biggest distraction for the better part of my professional career is I'm my own worst enemy. And I often joke to people that the only thing that has interfered with success at any point in my career has been me, because you know that expression when you go to the supermarket and you haven't eaten for a lot of hours, you have big eyes. Have you heard that expression?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's how I am in business sometimes. You know, I'll hear an idea or something, and I'll be, oh, that's great. We got to do that. Yeah, let's do that. And it might totally distract me and take me off the track. And now more than ever, I'm fighting that because my business, I'm being forced to pivot. We're all being forced to pivot.
Yeah.
But the way I'm being forced to pivot is for so much, I focus so much on training and in-person training. And now I'm having to transition more to virtual coaching.
Yeah.
And so now I have to, you know, make people aware. I mean, I've been doing this for my whole career, but I haven't really talked about it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just balancing that. This is really the right direction to go. This is going to satisfy my short and long-term goals versus, you know, having the big eyes and saying, oh yeah, this is the flavor of the month. This sounds great. And so, and the way I overcome it is I advocate for myself all the time. I'm lucky enough to have people in my life, such as yourself and such as other friends and people who I'll run ideas by, because if I start to get in that mode, I reach out to people and I go, am I nuts? Like, I mean, am I on the right track here? And, you know, my final thought on this is I watched Brene Brown on 60 Minutes on Sunday night. And she made a point, and it was the most simple point. I'm a huge fan of hers. And she made a very simple point. She said, you know, we're not meant in this world, we're not meant to be alone. You know, we're meant to connect with each other as human beings. And that's a pillar of who I am, is that I always want to surround myself with people who are smarter than me, who are positive, who are encouraging. And, you know, we all say we want to do it, but it's actually creating the room and the habits to actually making it happen. So that's how I handle it.
Well, Mark, I think what you were talking about reminds me of what I've heard referred to as the shiny object syndrome. And I think that's so, it's just inherent in the entrepreneurial ethos. You know, we get excited about this stuff. So it's what makes you so good at what you do, because you are paying attention to, you know, a whole lot of stuff. I realize you're channeling it into a vertical, but you've got a lot of stuff coming in constantly. So I think that it serves you well, and it's also, I think, great that, you know, you're aware of, you know, the potential hazards, but it does serve you well.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that.
So okay, all right, we're talking about goals. for the next time?
Okay, goals. All right. So my goal, my goal is to get my QuickBooks file to my accountant by the time we have our next podcast.
Okay.
And you know, it's funny, people might, now that the tax deadline's extended, it would even be more reason why I could put that on.
Yeah.
So that is my SMART goal. By the time that happens, to have electronically sent that file.
Okay. Well, I have been really falling down on my athletic goals, and it's so ironic because, well, I don't have a gym, but we're working on adapting to that. But you would think I have all this more time on my hands, but instead I've been baking bread and eating bread with my daughter. So I've got to do something about that. I am committing to 30 minutes of exercise of some sort every single day. And so I will report back on that next time.
Yeah, and by the way, Melissa, final thought on that is, you know, I'm with you. I want to do that too. And so I'm actually committing to 10 to get myself to 30, because
Great.
I know 30 will seem like a lot, even though it's
Smart.
not. So just keep that in the back of your minds.
Yeah, I will. In fact, I'm going to share. I found this guy just this morning who's got some little short workouts, little sprint workouts, like 10, 15 minutes.
Oh, that'd be great.
I'll send that to you.
Okay, excellent, excellent.
Great.
All right.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Mark. This has been valuable for me. I hope it's been valuable for our listeners. I appreciate you taking the time.
Melissa, I thank you. I really enjoy. I think we're on the cusp of something with this webinar and this podcast. And I think, you know, as we do more of them, you know, we're certainly going to take into consideration topics that our listeners ask us to do. But I am enjoying this. I feel like it's a great opportunity for us to share, and happy to do it with you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Melissa. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Catch 'em Keep 'em podcast. If you found this valuable, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss us next time. In the meantime, keep catching and keep keeping.